of release lead is something we've had for the last couple of releases, which is a very important role. And for Jakarta E11, Ed Burns and Arian Times took on that responsibility.
Yeah, and actually, I recently had an opportunity to have a chat with Ed Burns about the release role, release lead role. So let's roll that video and see Ed's impressions on the role. Hi there. How are you, Ed?
Hey, all right, Tanya, glad to be here. Another JakartaOne Livestream. Super exciting content this year.
Super exciting. So how about you introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm very humbled to have the role of release co-coordinator for Jakarta E11. We'll talk more about what that is later. But I'm also very humbled to be back heavily involved in Jakarta EE. The happiest and somehow most productive parts of my career were involved in working on Java EE and the JSF community and also Servlet and the other specs I did. So it's great to be back working as a testament to the continued relevance of the technology, but also the continued stability of the people working on the technology. Many of the same people have been doing it for the decades I have too, and it's been great to be collaborating with them again. For example, in Jakarta E11, we have the brand new spec Jakarta Data being developed by none other than Gavin King, who was back in the early days of Java EE as well. So it's great to be having this familiar continuity in the people and the technology.
Well, it's an honor to have you as one of the key contributors in the Jakarta EE technology. And also it is important to have you as a Jakarta EE release co-coordinator. Can you tell us a little bit more about why co-coordinator, and then why are you doing this? Why did you select to do this role?
Sure. So I learned from doing the specifications I mentioned earlier that it's much better to do it as part of a team than as an individual. So I insisted when I accepted the role of release co-coordinator that I have someone as a co, and that was my longtime colleague and friend Arian Times. And he was an early contributor to the JSF specifications also, and still continues to. And we had a great working relationship, so it was no problem to collaborate and develop with Arian. And he continues to be a super important contributor in getting things done. We wouldn't be where we are without his contribution, and also his colleague David and the OmniFish team. They are really making it possible, especially with regard to Glassfish 8 on JDK 17. And I can talk to some of those challenges in scope redefinition during the development of the project later on. But basically, the release co-coordinator role is driving the development and sort of pushing the component specs and making sure they deliver their plans, follow the JSP, Jakarta specification process.
Yes.
And they are coming up with a compelling set of features and then working with all of the other specs to get them delivered into a schedule, coming up with this wave list where we're going to deliver the specs in different batches, which we did do and got them all done well in time for delivery in calendar year 2024. And these release coordinator role also is responsible for kind of smoothing out any unexpected events that happen in the schedule. So, for example, initially the scope for E11 was only to target Java SE 21, and that decision was made before I came on as the release co-coordinator. But as we developed, one of our important vendors, Red Hat, pointed out, look, our product scope is really focusing on 17 and 21, so we have to add 17 and 21. And that was a bit of a curveball that was thrown late last year, but it was Arian who was able to step up and say, okay, yes, we will do a special branch of the Glassfish project and make it run on JDK 17, even though Pyara and the other aspects of the Glassfish community had moved it over to 21 already and sort of said, look, we're done with 17, we're moving forward. But with such a important legacy technology as Jakarta EE, we can't really be in the position of saying, look, you have to use 21. 17 is new enough. So getting the necessary negotiations among the stakeholders to agree to make the scope change is one thing that a release coordinator does. Another thing, of course, is reporting status to the specification and steering committees. That also can be a difficult job because schedules can slip due to various unforeseen circumstances, one of them being the Jakarta 11 TCK refactoring. The TCK is really the major differentiator between the way we do things here in Jakarta land and also JCP land, and pure open source projects that do not separate interface from implementation. That additional step of saying, look, this is a piece of software that will validate that what you have written independently implements the standard is really the gift of what we do in Jakarta EE, and other technologies such as Spring don't have to have that issue because there is only one Spring implementation. It's not a cross-vendor thing. And the value prop from the very beginning of JCP and Java has always been avoiding vendor lock-in. So at the top level as well, from the framework down to the bytecode, it's all, you can choose whatever vendor you like and not be locked in. So we're very, very serious about that. We're so serious that we're willing to make changes to the schedule to accommodate delivering the TCK. And the reason it's taking so long is that in software development, there is this thing of technical debt. And a technical debt is basically a fancy way of saying kicking the can down the road and not solving a problem that you know is there. And we took the decision to solve the problem in Jakarta 11, where the TCK hadn't been updated in some parts of it in over 20 years. It was using a unit testing software that predates JUnit, before the invention of really test-driven development and unit testing from Kent Beck. So this thing was called Java Test, and it was written in the early days of Java. And most of the TCK, instead of updating as time went on, they just said, yeah, we're just going to keep using this Java Test thing, even though it's getting older and crickety. So we said, no, we're going to rewrite it. So a big shout out to Red Hat, Scott Marlowe and Scott Stark, also Oracle, Guru, and Alwyn. They've been doing an amazing job taking on this extremely daunting task of rewriting 40,000 some tests to use current technologies such as Archillion instead of this old Java test thing. And there were some compromises that had to be made in terms of creating abstractions that kept some of the old config files, like this ts.jte file is still there, but running it on a newer base level infrastructure. And that's been taking time to get everything running.
And also, since we're talking about the TCK, it's also restructuring and making sure that its individual specifications can be tested by their TCKs and not having this lump of the TCKs
Correct.
where we're only testing the platform or the profiles, right?
Right, you're right. It's a good point. The individual components have their own TCKs, and they can sort of come together into the platform, but you can also test the specifications in a standalone manner.
Yeah, thanks so much. I kind of wanted to have a separate question related to TCK, but you covered it beautifully. Now that you told us about the TCK work and everything that is happening, what exactly is the status of Jakarta EE11 release?
So I mentioned, in order to be a Jakarta standard, you have to have an implementation, a specification with the pros text, and also an Java doc. Right. And although interestingly, the Javadoc, like the Maven module that implements that is the specification jar, is not a binding artifact. It's just the APIs. So we don't consider the Maven Central modules as part of the core specification deliverable, but they have to be there in Maven Central anyway. So it's kind of an informally required deliverable. And then, of course, the TCK that shows an implementation. So each component spec also has to have those three elements. And so each component spec of Jakarta 11, including data, JPA, or persistence rather, faces, they've all produced all of these things. What is remaining to be done is the platform and web profile TCKs. We are on the verge of releasing the entire core profile that is producing the specification API and the core profile TCK. That's going to be done in a matter of days now. It's going to ballot. And what is remaining is the web and platform TCK. And the current status is we are going to be producing a proposal to the standard committee, the specification committee, that we exclude a number of tests related to app client that were just the refactoring and getting everything running portion of these app client tests was not quite done. The reason we feel safe in making this proposal is that in Jakarta EE 12, app client, which is a very old way of running Jakarta EE technologies, still of course supported, still vendors are using that, but that way of running Jakarta EE hasn't been updated in a very long time. So we're going to be announcing in 12 that we're going to be marking app client for deprecation. So for this reason, we feel confident that we should not delay the schedule any further on the basis of app client tests not passing. So our proposal is to see if we can get all the other tests that are not app client tests fully running against Glassfish 8.0 JDK 17 and go to ballot with this list of exclusions saying, yeah, we're not testing these things. Implementations don't have to pass these tests.
That would, in that case, lead us to probably early 2025 for the release.
Well, the goal is to try to get the ballots started before the end of the year 2024. But that would certainly mean that the ballots have to run for 2 weeks, maybe less, but usually it's around 2 weeks. So it would come into early 2024 in the best case.
25, early
2025, yeah, sorry, in the best case, right.
Okay, so what exactly are the challenges of the release co-coordinator role?
This has definitely been challenging because it's an open source project with open standards, and the vendors have their own business objectives and agendas. And so it comes down to volunteer effort in many cases. So we've really had to place a lot of weight on Arjen and his open source contributor team that ends up being uncompensated work. And we would like to see kind of a more step up from the vendors as well to do this. That has been a challenge. It's always a challenge in open source, getting people to contribute their time.
But would you say, would you agree with me that over the last 6-7 years since we have the Jakarta EE technologies in open source, we actually came a long way. And
yes.
I would say that I am amazed by how our community, especially community of contributors and committers, are responding and still are being interested in evolving and modernizing Jakarta EE. So you as a release co-coordinator, do you actually have that perspective as well?
I do, and I think it's going to get even better once we get this out, because this is the first release of Jakarta EE with the new Jakarta namespace. We've already gotten the community past that hurdle of migrating their apps. That was the focus of EE10, honestly. And
9, like we moved from the JAVAX to Jakarta namespace in version 9. But yes, it takes a little bit of time for the implementers to implement and then customers to upgrade. You're right.
Right. And to be honest, I mentioned how Spring is not bound by having an independent TCK that is separately runnable by other vendors. Well, it is very important that Spring adopts Jakarta EE to the many dependencies that they have. So they have announced that they're going to be basing on EE11 for the next version of Spring. And that is a huge validation for the Jakarta EE work, because there's lots of enterprises out there that are built on Spring, and then transitively also built on Jakarta EE.
Absolutely.
So once we get that out, and once the new version of Spring comes out that depends on that, I think that's going to give some more energy to the open source contributors, because we will have finally gotten through an entire cycle of the new namespace with new features, Jakarta data being first and foremost in there, but there's a lot of new features in the other specifications as well.
With all of that, can you tell me what's next for Jakarta EE from your perspective? Do you have this?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I was just thinking about that, and I think Jakarta EE 12, we are going to be marking app client, which I mentioned earlier, as deprecated. That's one of the things. We're going to be continuing to refine the CDI-centric nature of the entire platform. My colleague at Microsoft, Reza Rahman, has some very solid concrete proposals for E12, and I intend to help get those implemented as well. And so we want to hit the ground running in 2025.
Amazing. Well, why don't we point out that the early draft of the release plan for Jakarta EE 12 is already available due to your effort and community as well. And I do want to announce to everyone, the wider community, that Ed Burns will continue to be release co-coordinator along with
Jared Anderson from IBM.
Yes. Thanks for all you do, Ed. We'll talk again when the release 12 gets solidified. In the meanwhile, on our meetings on the weekly basis.
That's right. Very much so. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye.
Enjoy the show, everyone.
So it is really great to chat with Ed, and thank you to Ed and Arjen for holding us accountable for the release 11. And I do want to also mention that Ed will be our release lead for the Jakarta E12, along with Jared Anderson. So thanks in advance. Very good sign of the active and vibrant community, I would say.
Yeah, so it's time to introduce the next talk. And the next talk is by Werner Kyle, which will introduce security in Jakarta EE.